Excuse me if I don't introduce the panel immediately, except by name, I guess, and then I'll introduce them at greater length. Joanna Macy, most of you will know. Tim Miller. Bill Metcalf. Kosha Joubert. Bindu Mohanty. And I'm Graham Meltzer. Okay. So, I welcome you to this final session. The panel session is titled The Communalism of the Great Turning. How many of you are familiar with the term the Great Turning? And by implication, about a third are not of the room. So you soon will be. We have the expert on the topic right next to me. And I hope that it will unfold, the reason why I've given it that title. So yes, I've been driven for the last 3 years in putting this conference together. But for me, it's just the kind of culmination of a lifelong journey. It's very much the pinnacle of actually that 30 or 40 year journey. And really the drive has really been, I guess, to do what I can do in a modest kind of a way, what I can to make a better world, as everyone in this community is doing, as I'm sure all of you are doing. We're all doing our best to try and make a better world. This kind of life purpose, if you like, was born of what I think of as breakthrough insights of the 60s and 70s, which I would argue that relationships of imbalance and inequity are fundamentally unhealthy, and that relationships of domination and exploitation must be resisted and dismantled. We reasoned back then, incited as we were by the Vietnam War and by apartheid and by the disclosures of feminism, that there are inalienable rights that all people, all species, every element of the biosphere deserves to be treated with respect, and that all life has intrinsic value. In that single most important sense, we're all equal. We're all equally essential links in the web that connects all life. As a teenager, I discovered and devoured utopian socialist literature, the writings of Moore and Fourier, Owen, Marx and Kropotkin, and I fell in love with the ideas and ideals underpinning communal living, which, it's often said, is utopian socialist thought made concrete. From that point on, communal living became a kind of deeply rooted preoccupation for me. Like many of you, I have lived in, researched, and visited hundreds of intentional communities. During those periods of my life when I lived in community, whether it be kibbutz or on a hippie commune, in eco-villages, in the spiritual community, communal living has been the means by which I've been able to unself-consciously apply my values in daily life and integrate them with my lifestyle. Lived congruency of values and lifestyle is, for me, the key to contentment, fulfillment, and a life well lived. At an analytical level, it's been my experience and the outcome of my observation and academic research that communal living is extremely effective in deepening an understanding of the aforementioned issues of equity, natural justice, relationship, and purpose. Communal living is fundamentally about mutuality, the interconnectedness and independence of members of a group. And it's from that source, which is essentially ecological, that I believe communal scholars and community activists derive their fascination, a shared fascination that has brought us here for this conference. Intentional communities are social science laboratories in which progressive ideas are tested, ideas aimed at building a more socially supportive, respectful, and compassionate world, both within the boundaries of a given community and elsewhere. Intentional communities incubate, develop, and model ideas and strategies that inform and inspire the world beyond. I'd like to pause at this point to introduce my recently born first grandchild. I hope his parents and great-grandparents are watching. This is Gus. He's currently living in Wellington, New Zealand. He's currently 5 months old. He's a bonny wee chap. We've been Skyping, he and I. We haven't met yet, but we will be in September, and I can't wait. Now here's the thing, the thinly disguised kind of reason that I'm showing him off in this way. Gus will likely live till the end of this century. Having read what I have about the future trajectory of our species, our biosphere and our planet, I find that a very scary prospect. And so might he. And so might he if he had any idea of the state of the world that he's been born into. Could you turn it off? That was my phone, folks. That's God calling. Or Gus, yeah. Maybe Gus is God. He's the new Dalai Lama. It's impossible to imagine how life might be for Gus when he's my age and older. If we were only to consider the scale of social and technological change that we've witnessed over the last century, and recognise that the rate of change is currently relentlessly quickening, then in those terms alone it's impossible to imagine how things might be for Gus. But we know that there'll be many further more serious challenges facing Gus's generation. Peak oil, resource depletion, reduced biodiversity, financial crises, wealth inequity, climate change, amongst others. And I think I agree with the woman who questioned Robert in the first plenary, that I think climate change for me is the biggie amongst those. Fortunately for Gus, we have something in common other than our shared DNA. Like his grandpa, Gus holds a New Zealand passport, which undoubtedly will become a valuable possession when the going gets rough. That is, when climate change due to global warming renders much of the planet uninhabitable. Does that sound alarmist? I really don't believe it is, actually. If I may quote that great social thinker and mentor of us all, Woody Allen, more than at any time in history, mankind faces a crossroads. One path leads to despair and utter hopelessness, the other to total extinction. Let us pray that we have the wisdom to choose correctly. And yet, I actually don't despair when I think about our common future, nor even Gus's future. No, surely it is these very same challenges that will solicit humankind's greatest creativity, its greatest courage, and its greatest effort. And it's crucial to remember that problems and challenges are not all there is. So long as there is life, there is and there must be hope. So long as there is life, there is beauty, there is solace, and there is joy. So long as there is life, there is compassion, intelligence, and love. I absolutely do anticipate that we'll see widespread chaos and suffering in the decades to come. But I'm also confident that our species has the capacity to be able to carve out some manner of civilised and sustainable future. I see that unfolding mostly within pockets of progressive people, anchored in their bioregions and their neighbourhoods, building communities and cultures, habitats and economies with sufficient resilience to be able to withstand what's coming. The kinds of communities and initiatives that we've been canvassing at this conference. That's why I've been a lifelong advocate of communal living. That's why I've been so driven in piloting this conference. That's why I propose the conference theme, Communal Pathways to Sustainable Living. I truly believe that the future is communal. Woody Allen is right about one thing. As a species with intelligence and will, we are at a crossroads, faced with a choice between business as usual and a more sustainable future. The problem is that we've been standing indecisively at these crossroads for about 50 years. In the meantime, the devil has sidled up with a Faustian offer. Our souls in exchange for material and consumerist wealth and power. Tempting perhaps, but a self-defeating and a self-destructive bargain made only at a measurable cost socially, culturally, and spiritually. Intentional communities are crucibles of social well-being, cultural resurgence, and spiritual growth, and as such, they have the potential to diffuse and supplant futile materialist and consumerist preoccupations. That, in a nutshell, is why I believe they are so important, because they model a better, more conscious mode of being for our species, and a more conscious, less anthropocentric, egocentric direction for our species will help safeguard the biosphere for every other living species. As cartoonist Don Peraro puts it, the link between communalism and sustainability has been invoked as a theme for this conference because that choice at the crossroads has become the project of our time, such that every effort needs to be made, every opportunity taken to address it. I don't doubt that future generations will look back upon our time with total disbelief, especially this last 50 years, when we've been somewhat dumbstruck at the crossroads. A period of growing awareness of environmental degradation and global warming, but one also characterised by powerful resistance to change and complete political ineptitude and indecision. To have held such a conference on communalism and not address sustainability would have been for me negligent, if not criminal, a further perpetration of interspecies and intergenerational injustice. And besides, I want Gus to be able to say of his grandpa that he did his best amidst the madness of his time. To help me make the case for the importance of communalism in the 21st century, I've invited 5 speakers, all of whom I much love and respect, to address the matter through the lens of their particular expertise. It's an honour to be able to begin with introducing Joanna Macy. Joanna's a long-standing friend of this community who's held workshops here for many years. You may well have noticed, if you've perused the website for this conference, that her bio and her image heads the top of the list of presenters. This is not because she's the most esteemed, although she is that. It's because she was the first to sign up. And that list was compiled chronologically. So when I learned 2.5 years ago that Joanna was holding a workshop in the week following the conference, I immediately wrote to her and asked her whether she could possibly come a few days earlier and be involved in this one. And I think it's a measure of her graciousness and her generosity that she's sitting right next to me now. So I'm just very touched and very grateful that I'm able to hand over the microphone to Joanna, who is going to tell us about the Great Turning, her area of expertise.
I'm so glad to be here. I think that what you have been up to, much of which I've missed the last 3 days, what you've been up to for the last 3 years, Graham, will be increasingly seen as essential to the survival of decent communications among us humans in the decades ahead. So I see that what you wrote is that I'm going to talk about the unfolding of the Great Turning. Now, the Great Turning is a sort of cultural meme that I picked up, and I remember first using it in Australia and teaching tour in 1997. But it's floating around, and along with the other names for this revolution that we are part of now. And I have found it a wonderfully useful term for the transition from business as usual to a life-sustaining civilization or society or culture. And I would like to speak as I sense from these 13 years of this century, how it looks like it will unfold. And I want to put emphasis on the confluence of 2 great rivers in our time, that of spirituality and the other of science. I think that the convergence of scientific thought in new paradigm science, quantum theory, chaos theory, systems theory, Gaia theory, along with a growing spiritual apprehension of being interconnected in the sacred living body of Earth, as the awakening voices of our indigenous brothers and sisters. Well, we all have indigenous roots, and they're all stirring and throbbing and pulsing, I think, as we return from centuries and millennia of the patriarchal domination of religious organizations and theologies to a refreshed reverence for the living system that is the earth that we are part of and come from. And it is a great comfort to me to look around here and see that what my supposition is, that all of you come right out of Earth, that not anyone has been imported from another galaxy, that everything that you have learned, everything that you are, the wounds and the triumphs, the lessons, the journeys and adventures are all that of being an earthling. I think that this science-based spirituality or spiritually illumined science is going to be all the more important for us. We're going to move toward it ever more naturally as the world around us, the society, falls into increasing panic and social hysteria for the very reasons that Graham has alluded to. With what's coming down on us, it's going to be so easy to turn on each other, to blame, to take revenge, to harden into opposing positions, and therefore I think that that's one of the many reasons where what you're representing and working on here, the social technologies that go with intentional communities, conflict resolution and restorative justice, will be so important. I imagine, what I foresee is that these communities, and I must say that I loved that film last night, with all their quirks and all their laughable, they're so beautiful, that gorgeous adventure, and that the work that you are chronicling and encouraging and part of here in this association is going to be seen shine ever more importantly, significantly, that these communities are going to be islands of decency and sanity in a society where it is very easy to fall into panic and vengeance and struggle for scarcity. And that doesn't bring out the best in us so far. And so what is being chronicled and learned here is going to be treasured even more and play an even more important role than I imagine many of us and many of you realize. I see this great turning as made possible by a spirituality of overarching mutual belonging to each other and to this larger body of which we are a part. And that our apprehensions of this and our celebrations of this, the practices that we can draw on, are very diverse, fortunately. We can turn to indigenous spiritualities, like what we were practicing a little bit this morning, and from Native American Thanksgiving and gratitude for what is, even though you've been mistreated and are tremendous hardship, humiliation, and want, to the earth wisdom traditions that are present on every continent, and whose voices are now being heard again, louder than at any time in my life. And I'm probably the oldest one here. But at any rate, we won't get into competing in age, but this is a wonderful gift in this time, is the return of these ancient voices that know and have practiced, the shamanic voices, the goddess religion voices of our mutual belonging and total dependence upon this larger body. And when you're totally dependent on this for your understanding, for the beauty you see, for the nourishment of body and soul, there is a sense that this is sacred. And the apprehension and cultivation of this being held in this sacred body will be of increasing comfort and reassurance. It's going to keep a lot of us from going crazy. We will know we're already home, and then you don't panic about how it's going to turn out. It will help us live with a radical uncertainty that will continue. I can't say, as Graham said, about his confidence in what people will do. Maybe. But I feel that I'm making friends with a lot of my colleagues with living with this radical uncertainty, which will have the last word. We'll know in this century, will it be the great unraveling? I borrow that term from David Corton, the unraveling of biological and ecological and cultural systems. I like that term because these systems don't just fall over dead. They begin to lose their cohesion, their differentiation, their complexity, their memory. And there may come a time when, in the Great Turning, there's not enough complexity left for us to pull it together. But I believe that this spirituality of belonging to the sacred living body of earth will hold us to even face that. This sense that we're home and that nothing can ever separate us from the sacred living body of earth. And the practice that we can cultivate increasingly of drawing guidance and strength from that and from our brother, sister beings of all species, and from the ancestors, and from the future generations. So I think, too, that I'd like to say that what I foresee and experience already is that this great turning of the human journey, the human psyche, the human heart-mind, we're learning to think from our hearts, will change our relationship to time. This one-way arrow of linear chronological time where the past is always behind us, lost irretrievably, gone, doesn't matter what we do or what we remember of it or what we keep of it, and the future an abstraction that recedes, and it's not quite here, and we're caught in the agitation and acceleration of the industrial growth society, driven by it, that what we find, what we will be waking up to increasingly, is that our actions are extending in their consequences forever. What under pressure of business profit and efficiency and governmental fear and military, national security, state. What we're deciding now, whether we're talking about nuclear power or hydrofracking and the chemicals put in to the groundwaters or the genetically modified foods, they will last forever. That means that our karma extends forever, and for us, that will mean, since we're creatures of choice and consequence, that our relationship to time is changing. And we've been experimenting with that a lot in the work that reconnects, which is the vehicle by which one of them, by which I work for the Great Turning, is that to change our way to be able to imagine ourselves in relation to the past and the future. And it will be a holographic relationship. So the holographic view from science, like you get from Karl Pribram, and also from spirituality, as you get from the Avatamsaka Sutras, which are remarkable to be able to live with a companionship of the presence of the past and the future generations. I think that the relationship of, in our work, the role of art, music, dance, song, will grow ever more important. We're going to be leaving this kind of wordage more and more, or spicing it up and interweaving it with. And I will never forget how you were smart enough to start, and I wish this could be put on the headlines around the world of people who hold conferences. The final panel began with dancing and drumming. I congratulate you. So, has that been 10 minutes?
Oh, at least.
At least. Oh, well. Well, at least I didn't read. If I'd read, I would have. If I'd read, I would have been perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joanna. I'll never live it down now. But you'll be here a week. I've got a week to take revenge. For those of you who don't know him, Tim Miller is one of the great stalwarts of the ICSA, a long-standing member, a past president, a board member for many years, attends all of the conference and inevitably delivers interesting papers. I've always thought of him as a bit of a brother, a fellow participant in the hippie shenanigans of the 60s and 70s, but one, unlike myself, who went on to become a distinguished scholar of the same. In his contribution to a recently published volume, The Communal Idea in the 21st Century, Tim wrote of the damage wrought over the last 300 years by what he called a massive celebration of individualism. He argued that the work of communal scholarship in attempting to understand community is vital to pointing our culture in a more positive and pro-social direction. He's now going to share with us those views. Tim Miller.
Okay, time for outright pessimism. 12 years ago at the ICSA conference at the ZEG community, I was asked to tell our colleagues why I thought academic communal studies mattered. And I'm not going to say anything too much different than what I said then. I haven't changed my mind very much. What I believe is that we live in a world that needs community as never before. And I also believe that never before has human community been in such decline as it is today. We live in a world where egotism and selfishness are paramount values celebrated publicly, and traditional values like close nurturing community are in pretty bad shape. So here we have a world, it's an irony here, a world is drowning in its excesses, and an important cause of that is the retreat from community that we see all around us. On the other hand, academic communal studies, or communal studies broadly, one of the few places where I think a difference could be made is a field inhabited by the smallest handful of scholars, communitarians, preservationists. Here we are, most of us here in this room. But despite our small numbers, the work is vital because I think we do have answers the world needs. I won't go through the list of crises at length. You know what the crises of the day are: environment, crime, poverty, social injustice, economic injustice, racism, prejudice against women and homosexuals, and certain ethnic groups, unpopular religions. And Robert Gilman to the contrary, I think war and other kinds of violence are going to be with us for a long time. So why do these seemingly intractable social problems, why are they with us? I'd argue that they come from a variety of human activities. Industrial capitalism has led to a society in which a small elite controls enormous resources while vast numbers are in poverty. Urbanization has contributed to a terribly unwholesome physical environment. Modern life gives us alienation. We have a race into anti-community, if you will. Our cars have given us little anonymous environments in which we don't have to interact in a personal way with others. Television's taken us out of the public square and isolated us in our living rooms. We have a vast flow of information through computers, which takes us out of libraries and has us sit alone staring at a screen, walking down the street, looking at smartphone screens, of course, common activity today. I think Western culture glorifies rampant individualism of the worst kind, not the kind that embraces creativity and diversity, but the kind that promotes a me-first attitude that puts the selfish interests of the individual ahead of the common good. So, with that situation, where do we go? And at the risk of sounding simple, which I probably am, I do believe the solution to the breakdown of community is the creation of more community. I do think that's what the world is calling for right now. Of course, there are many types of community. I think people use it in all kinds of ways in modern life. But of the many kinds, I think living in intentional communities is perhaps the best way there is to establish real human community in a larger sense. Although the number of persons living in intentional communities is very small, I think a tiny fraction of 1% of the population, communities do provide a crucial model for another way of life. Some continue to be heavily communal, all members living from a common treasury, giving up private property. Some have a focus in a particular religious outlook or a central secular philosophy. And at the same time, traditional religious communitarians, Hutterites notably, are still an enormous part of the overall communal scene. And some other forms that are more modern remain influential. The Kibbutzim of Israel, for example. There's a lot of community around, it's diverse, but as a percentage of population, it's not very big. Okay, we academics are supposed to be analysts, not activists, not advocates. But I do believe that the massive celebration of individualism of the destructive sort, of anti-community of the last 200 or 300 years has produced some dreadful consequences. And I think that the return to community in its many forms and the development of more intimate and supportive human relationships are major parts of the answer to the problem. And that, in a nutshell, is why I think communal studies matters and why the International Communal Studies Association is important. I really profoundly hope that communal studies scholars could have high dedication to a socially beneficial outcome to their work. So, okay, I'm an academic, and it makes it sound as if the ICSA is only about scholars, but it's much broader than that, of course. It has two principal constituencies, the scholars and the practicing communitarians, and they need each other. For scholars, I think that's obvious. We got to have someone to study. But the other side of the equation is equally important. I think communitarians and communities today need scholars. A major reason for that is that communities, for all their strengths, are widely regarded by the general public as cesspools of odd and deviant human behavior. Whatever that may be, you know, that's what people think. Words like commune and cult and sect arise all too often. For a lot of people today, there's no essential difference between the word commune or intentional community and the word cult. And I think as a kind of a side matter, I think that's a good reason to abolish the word cult from our vocabulary. People who do things differently shouldn't be just automatically suspect. Anyway, the simple fact is that scholars need communities and communities need scholars. And that means that the ICSA has a very valuable role to play, and I just hope we can make it live up to its very considerable potential. So I'm going to close with something I've closed with before. One of the best known communes of the 1960s era in America was the farm in Tennessee, of whom we have a representative here. Beginning as a loose group of spiritual seekers in San Francisco, the people who eventually became the residents of the farm piled into this long caravan of buses and finally, after months on the road, settled down to build a commune. They have continued. Today, as some of you saw in the workshop a couple days ago, they perform tireless work for social and environmental justice and reform. About 3 years after they arrived in Tennessee, they published what I still think is one of the most insightful primary documents of the communes of the era, a colorful book called Hey Beatnik. This is the farm book. One of the short articles in the book is entitled, "This country needs in great numbers to become voluntary peasants." And I'll begin my own remarks by quoting this clarion call of Stephen Gaskin in that essay that I quoted before. He says, "That's what I go around the country for, to try to talk to lots and lots of people," and it says on the front of our bus, "out to save the world." That phrase is chosen from the old thing, well, I ain't out to save the world, but we are, out front. I don't know anything else to do that seems worthwhile. I can already feed myself. I already was a college professor. Not as much fun as this. Want to help?
Thank you, Tim, and thank you, Stephen. Beautiful, if you're watching, Stephen. Bill Metcalf and I go way back, to way before I'd even heard of the ICSA. He was a friend and a mentor and my PhD supervisor in the 90s, and has been a good friend and a mentor ever since, as he has been for dozens and dozens and dozens of postgraduate, undergraduate and postgraduate students. In fact, he brought 2 or 3 PhD students with him to this conference. Like Tim, Bill is a long-standing board member, a past president, and whilst he was president, he organised the kind of seminal conference at ZEG in 2001. And Bill is a historian, a sociologist with a very keen eye for trending phenomena, and an equally acute interest in what you might call niche communal groups. And so I think he's the perfect person to address what I think of as the kind of trajectory of the communal movement in the 21st century. So thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Graham. The worst part of supervising a PhD student is they have the opportunity later to come back and bite you on the bum. And that's what Graham's doing, you see, because looking at this topic, and I was thinking, now what do I know about the evolution of intentional communities? I know an awful lot about the history of the evolution of intentional communities. I'm an expert on that. What do I know what's going to happen next week or next year? Well, perhaps not much, but we'll have a go at it. I also wondered, is there such a thing as intentional community culture? Is there only one? Or is there a whole range? Is it evolving? And finally, how would I know? All I can do is look at the past, look at the present, put on my thinking hat and try to go forward. When I look at the past, I see a number of turning points, a number of great turnings that were supposed to lead to the new age. We can go back to the various medieval utopias, to the various new Jerusalems that were supposed to be coming, the various groups who were going to bring down God's will on earth, the age of Aquarius in our own lifetime, and not one of them have ever come into fruition. They've come in small ways, they've come in peripheral ways, But any of those great predictions that at the time for some people seemed almost inevitable didn't evolve, or evolved in very trivial ways, as I feel. So then we wonder whether the things we're predicting today will fare any better. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, I'm not sure. I then tried to be slightly more academic or intellectual or analytical, which is what we're paid to do. And I said, let's narrow this down to a number of trends and let's focus on about the last 200 years. And we're not just focusing on the West, but as far as we know about the history of intentional communities, let's look at that. One was the notion of radicalism. And what can we say from looking at the past couple hundred years? We find that for what was happening was going from more radical, some very radical groups, down to becoming less radical over time. Almost all communal groups, almost all intentional communities follow that path from more radical to less radical, and then they become usurped by another group, more radical group, that takes over from them. We rarely find intentional communities making the step back. Now there are exceptions, but the general pattern is you go from radical to relatively less radical to relatively conservative until you sort of disappear and you've been replaced by another group that comes in and pushes you off your perch. Will that continue? I don't know. Do we see that process at the Findhorn Foundation? I'm not sure. I'm not a member here. Perhaps we do and perhaps we don't. And neither am I saying whether it's good or bad. Location. Where do we locate intentional communities? Has that changed over time? Well, it has to some extent. 200-300 years ago, there were a lot of attempts at communal living that were urban-based. A lot of people believed that's where it was. The whole monastic movement, to a fair extent, went into an urban thing. Then we went to this phase, particularly through the last century, became very rural-based. If you go back to the 1960s, 70s, the idea of urban intentional communities would be almost a non sequitur. It wouldn't make sense. Now we're seeing a trend back. More and more intentional communities now are urban, or at least suburban based. Less of the developing ones are really rural. Okay, so we're getting more of a connection back there. Again, is that good or bad? I'm not sure. It's of course led by the co-housing movement, but that's not the only part. There's a genuine trend, I think, away from the fear of urban areas and toward the recognition that urban areas and cities, for better or worse, are where most of us live and where it's probably going to happen, and it's probably going to get saved there, not out in the hills of Kentucky or wherever we happen to be, or New South Wales in Australia. Size. We go back a couple hundred years ago, almost all intentional communities that we know about were large. The larger the better. Size was good. We went through then in the 19th century, smaller and smaller and smaller group, the idea coming down even to individual household communes, 5, 6, 7 people, etc. Quite small, very intense. Now I believe we see a trend back the other way, toward much larger units, often which have within them smaller subunits. Okay? So we're now getting larger eco-villages, larger groups, but then will contain core groups within it that interact. Or it could be, whether we want to call it like a co-housing center, grouping within an eco-village, that sort of thing. So I think we're coming back towards smaller units within them. Age. If we go back a couple of years ago, this was anything but a youth movement. This was a movement of people in their mature and later years. It was the young people were not interested, if we go back 200 years ago or so, in this sort of thing. It was an aged thing. Again, we go through the 20th century, went through being seen as a youth movement, and I think now it's changing back to a middle-aged, to indeed a senior movement. We had a wonderful talk this morning by Margaret about elder eco-villages, elder co-housing sort of thing. And so I think the movement is aging. As the movement ages and matures as a movement, I think so too the membership is tending to appeal to older people rather than younger people. I still get asked stupid questions by reporters about what happened to all the young people that were in the communes in the 60s and 70s. And, you know, because the subtext of this is that, well, clearly they all left those stupid groups and went and became decent people like accountants and that sort of thing. Well, of course, a lot of them, some did, but a lot of them didn't. A lot of them, some present company included, stayed involved but got older. And the mean age, for every group I've been able to say, the mean age is increasing. So I think we're becoming very much a middle age to an older movement. And I say one of my predictions at the end that comes into that. Now this could change, of course. We could go back and swing back to younger, but that's not the way it's going that I see it at the moment. Age. Next one is planning. If we go back a couple hundred years ago, the communes, we now say intentional communities, were extraordinarily well planned, extraordinarily well designed, extraordinarily well thought out. Very clear as to who would be eating where, who would be sleeping where, how we will do this. Very, very clear sets of rules and regulations and relatively good explanation for why they were important to be followed. The other end of the pendulum, of course, came with the 60s, 70s kind of anarchistic, in a small a anarchistic movement that was very naive in many ways. They said, well, anything goes. We'll have no rules. We'll have no regulations. Whatever you want to do is fine by me. We'll just let it all hang out and it will all work very well. And that did work relatively well for some people for short periods of time. But we're very much seeing a swing away from that now. My friend John Talbot over here gave a wonderful talk the other day about Narrar Eco-Village in Australia, and I forget how many consultancy reports you needed. It was a ridiculous number. Now, this would be unthinkable 50 years ago. You just bloody well would have got on the land and start whacking up houses and go for it, okay? So not only is it not possible to do that anymore, but it's not good either. Because some of these groups from 40, 50 years ago were very, very destructive, very wasteful because of the sloppiness, the lack of planning. A lot of damage was done in many ways, and a lot of good was achieved. But we're moving toward much more careful planning, much more careful organizing within that, and we're developing as part of that a group of people who are able to advise on that. So we have people, John happens to be living in my country right now in Australia and is a fantastic resource for this intentional community. If he wasn't there, who would be able to do that? There are more and more people now around the world able to provide those services. Okay? So organization, we're moving from disorganized toward better organized. How do governments respond? How do corporations, how do large organizations respond to intentional community? Well, if we go back a couple hundred years ago, they were either very much supported and seen as part of the right order of things because they help maintain social control. They help maintain proper morality. They're either seen that way or they were ignored. Again, we moved through the 20th century. It became more and more either a source of ridicule, a source of joking about how ridiculous some people can be, until being downright threatening. Where some of these were seen as a serious threat to society, to morality, to proper family life, to a whole range of these things. And some language we still have resonates with that. So my friends from Zeg, I've often joked with the word free love. That was the correct German translation into English, ended up with a word that didn't represent what they meant in German, because it had another whole thing to it, even though it was a literal translation. So I think we've gone from that, through that period where these things were seen as being threatening, to more and more being seen as, well, it's part of the answer. Okay? It's coming even in the most conservative part of Australia, Tasmania, good old Tasmania, that gets forgotten off the map, now has a state policy trying to encourage intentional communities, because it's seen as one of the sources of development that might actually work. Okay? So I think we've won to some extent that battle. If I go back to issues at Findhorn when I was here, started coming here 31 years ago, you were something of a pariah within the larger area. You might still be a pariah, but I don't think you are. And my understanding is it's much, much more accepted and recognized by at least informed people in local government that this is part of the answer, not part of the solution. So there's some of those mega trends that I can identify from over the last 200 years. And they're all arguable, but So then the hard part comes. What are my predictions? Well, predictions. I'll try and be relatively modest. One, and this is a no-brainer, co-housing is going to become more common in urban and suburban settings. If I was a gambling man, I'd be buying shares in Co-Housing Incorporated because I think that answers a lot of things. Whether that's the best outcome or not is arguable, and many of my colleagues would challenge whether that's the best, but it certainly is one that's happening. It solves an awful lot of problems for a lot of people. For co-housing, I think there's no choice. It's going to increase tremendously. I believe that eco-villages are going to become less rural and more suburban. I think they're going to be tying more into urban areas and not be separate from it. I think the boundaries we have are going to fade away, partly because they have to, and partly because that's what people want. Cities are pretty damn good places in lots of ways. They have some wonderful resources. And you set yourself up 200 kilometers from the nearest urban area, you're creating a lot of problems for yourselves. So I think that's one of the changes. The third, I think the distinctions between intentional community and commune and co-housing, and I think these are going to start they are wearing away right now. We get more and more examples of intentional communities that will say, well, we're an eco-village, and others that say we're not an eco-village, and yet the one that isn't an eco-village is more ecologically sound than the one that says it is. We get more and more examples where co-housing becomes part of an eco-village, so there isn't a boundary there. It's one as a subset of the other, and I think this can only increase. And so we also get more and more examples of eco-villages that will contain within them not just co-housing elements, but also communes, communal houses within them. So the boundaries are getting a bit faint. And that's really difficult for we academics, because we love boundaries and classification systems, but they're not, we need to come up with some better classifications. I think I'm positive so far. My negative thing, the other thing I predict is we're going to see that this wonderful movement we have is going to be taken over more and more often by forces that we don't agree with. I think we're going to find more survivalist groups, which aren't necessarily so bad, although they can be, but also I think we're going to find terrorist groups deciding that communal modes of living are very supportive. Just as intentional community, communal living is going to be very helpful in the way you mentioned, I think it can also be very helpful in very destructive ways as well. And I can't tell you that I know 3 of these groups already or anything, but that's one of my predictions, that what we've discovered and that works for us also works for other people in very negative ways. And I predict we're going to have some problems from that front. And I think they're going to be bloody hard to deal with, because the resilience that you have as an eco-village would also be the resistance that would help a group who are trying to work against us. Okay, so I hope I'm wrong on that one, but I don't think I am. The final one, that again, where's Margaret? Margaret, who spoke this morning? Margaret's here somewhere. Oh, Margaret, hi. Again, I don't mean to be rude to Margaret. Again, something of a no-brainer. I think the senior co-housing, the senior intentional communities is an obvious here. More and more of us are looking that way. I think it's one of the answers. It's an answer on a small level, and it can be an answer on a larger level. I think we have our age group, sort of moving through, we're moving into that, we're not going to live in institutional senior care. We don't want to, we're not willing to. And I recommend 3 movies to you that I've seen recently. One is called And If We All Live Together. The second is called The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. And the third is called The Quartet. Now, all 3 of these are about people in our age group that in desperation suddenly discover a way to live together and the benefits that come out of that. And I just want to quote one little snippet from a woman playing Sissy, Pauline Collins, in The Quartet. And she's talking about why she needs the group. This place is a godsend for me, because I've got no husband and no children. But I've got you. And I think that's one of the big predictions, that we're all going to need each other in some form of intentional community, be it senior or otherwise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. So, as you know, the ICSA is comprised of both communal scholars who research and write about community, as well as community activists, community members who live the dream and advocate for it. So if Tim Miller and Bill Metcalf epitomise the former, our next speaker gloriously epitomises the latter. Kosha Joubert has lived 20 years in community, mostly in the influential eco-village of Sieben-Linden, but more recently here at Findhorn. She is the super president of the Global Eco-Village Network, spending enormous energy and time in far-flung places, inspiring eco-village and community development. She's a mother of 2 wonderful teenagers and was recently married to the very lucky Robin Alfred. She's here to share her thoughts with us on the future for the eco-village movement in the 21st century. Kosha.
I have to say I feel so lucky because being in this very special and privileged role that I have serving as president of GEN, I have the great privilege to be connected to people all over the planet that are doing the work on the ground. And I have the incredible privilege in each of our international board meetings to get the freshest news from Asia, from Africa, from South America, from North America, from Australia, about what are the new things that are happening. So I'm really sorry, but I can't help but be totally not only blasted away by the beauty of what people are doing, but also be incredibly hopeful. And I don't know whether I'm naive, but this is what is totally flowing through me. And it's what I hear, it's what I see, it's what I'm connected to. And I also think that we need to go beyond the Western and European and Northern spheres to really see what is happening on the ground at the moment. And this is what's been strong in the Eco-Village Network in the past, mainly 7 years, have been the Southern networks that have come up with a force and a power and a youth, that is amazing, and that is bringing new energy and new meaning to what. I mean, when I spoke to Robert Gilman about this, he spoke about the dead centres, and what is happening in the Eco-Village Network, where yes, in the north and the west it's aging and some things, but there's this new wave of energy coming. So that's where I come from. Feel very privileged. And I feel like at the core of what we've all been talking about is the fact that I feel that the most underutilized resource we have at the moment on this planet is the wish of people to make a difference, to be part of the solution, to create new realities, to talk to each other about solutions. And in the heart of every person on this planet is that impulse to heal, to leave this planet a beautiful place for their children, their grandchildren. We saw Graham's grandchild here, All the elders here in the room have connection to grandchildren, their own or others. We have connection to children. We all know that these are the people that we're passing the planet on to. And the longing to be a part of the new is so big in us. And some of us have had the privilege to believe enough and to find the pathway to feel like that seed of longing has been able to flower and to express itself in the work that we're doing. And many of us at the moment in this planet have not found that pathway yet, have not found the path to actually feel we can become a part of the solution. Because we know on this planet we have the intelligence, we know we don't have to continue business as usual. We know about the solutions, And it's yes, we can say we haven't been intelligent enough as a collective to make that shift. We have shown collective stupidity. We haven't shown collective wisdom. This is true. But it just takes the switch to flip in every single one of us. Yeah, and we know that this flipping motion, it needs to start, and the numbers increase, and at some point we flip. And we don't know when that moment will be, and it is the great turning. And I believe in it. I believe it's possible, and it's what I feel because of that seed of longing that's alive in the hearts of people. And when I was thinking about what to talk about here, I actually had a memory come, which I'm still not quite sure why it's important, but it just came to me strongly. And it was this crystal clear memory of a moment of power in my life. This is when I was much younger and much wilder, and I was walking. At that moment, I was at a place in the Himalayas, really far, far up. I was above the source of the Ganges, the holy river, Gangotri. And I was there with one of the sadhus who lives there in a cave, and he had on his lungi. And I had the honor of staying with him in this cave, and I was dressed in my kind of hippie dress, kind of a trousers and a shirt of some kind, and flip-flops that I had used as I walked with him over a glacier and over pieces of snow to come to this cave, you know. And as we walked over this meadow, collecting some herbs, we ran into a group of mountaineers. And they were dressed in like total high-tech stuff. Yeah, they were dressed from top to toe in like all this, you know, I don't even know how to describe it, but it was like this mountaineering stuff, you know, the whole thing complete with like stuff over their nose to protect their nose from the sunburn, and sunglasses and hats and walking sticks. And we kind of looked at each other in total amazement. Yeah, it was just this meeting, you know, this sadhu also had like dreadlocks up to his bum, you know. It was just this total meeting of opposites, and opposites ways of engaging with the surroundings we found ourselves in. And as we walked on, we met the carriers of their luggage, and we also saw the place that I had camped the night before. And we saw the tins and the plastic waste that was left from the night before. And somehow I think this image just teaches us something about what is needed at this time around reconnection, and how far it takes us from our attachment to safety and security sometimes. You know, and I think it's so beautiful that the work is also called the work that reconnects, because I think that's so much at the core of what we do. You know, and there's the work of reconnecting inside of us to those parts in us, the emotions, the feelings that are not so comfortable, that are anger, that are mourning, that are sadness, that are fear that we need to connect to. There's the connection that really needs to happen across the planet to those parts of human culture, you know, that how do we really connect to each other? And this is what we're learning so much about in the Global Eco-Village Network at the moment, as we deepen our dialogues, south, north, north, south, east, west, west, east, the south and the north with the north and the south, etc. Yeah? But just deepening these dialogues, and above all, to reconnect to nature. Nature within and without. And there's something where we are asked to become naked and really understand that we don't know, and let go of our luggage. And I don't think we can make the step into the future without that. So for me, looking at the Eco-Village Network, I acknowledge that we are a village network. This is what we are. This is our nature. And yes, there are villages in urban settings, but I think it's true that the main thrust of the Eco-Village Network is in the rural areas. And I think there's a deep collaboration happening with co-housing, happening with Transition Town, which is town, yeah? And there's a collaboration happening to transition society at this moment in time. And this transition process really takes us beyond the concept of intentional communities and eco-villages as islands. Because today we're at a place where every village needs to become a sustainable settlement or an eco-village. Every city needs to become a green city. And it's not a question of a dream or a wish, this is the necessity that we're going to. And one thing I want to say around the urbanization is that wherever we travel, and wherever the feelers of the eco-village networks go, which is far and wide, we don't find those traditional and the indigenous villages which say, oh, actually, we find urban life much more interesting, and we'd love to move into those slums because it's so great to live there. Yeah? It's not the information we get from our networks. The information that comes is that we don't have a choice. Our waters have been polluted, our forests have been appropriated, our lands have been taken and polluted. We cannot survive anymore. We'd love to survive. And I believe that with internet happening now, there is no need anymore for humanity to move into urban centers. I don't believe that urban centers have the same capacity for sustainability, thriving, that smaller settlements have. So I think we're going to come back to a balance. Yeah? And I think we need currently to put energy to see, from governments also, to see what is happening in those villages. How can we support those villages? And this is what's happening, and this is also where we're active. So the places of hope I look to at the moment are those places where government understands we cannot create the change without the people. We don't have the money anymore, we don't have the economic capacity, we need to work with the power of the people. And it's places like Senegal at the moment where the government has a program for transitioning 14,000 traditional villages to eco-villages. It's places like Thailand at the moment, which has just decided to transition the northern provinces of Thailand to eco-provinces, following the eco-village strategies for sustainable development. And I think there is a very special kind of ignition process that can happen when bottom-up and top-down strategies come together and really start working together. So coming from that, coming from this seed and this potential that lies within the hearts of all people, this possibility of new collaborations across all strata of society where we really know that the transition is a necessity, I really believe that the Great Turning is a possibility, and that the intentional community movement and the eco-village movement are a deep part of inspiring that change. Thank you very much.
Kosha, I love you. As many of you will know, the ICSA has only ever had its conferences in Europe, in Western Europe, in fact, in Israel and in North America. Personally, I'm somewhat embarrassed by this. As an organization with the word international in its name, it's just tragic that we haven't really ventured into those other vast regions of the world, South America, Eastern Europe, Asia, Africa, Australasia. And in fact, we had a board meeting at lunchtime where we discussed this very possibility, so I predict that within 2 conferences from now we will be in one of those regions. I would love to see the next conference or the one after that, for example, in the world's largest intentional community. And why not, for example, in Oroville in southern India? Largest and one of the best known for that matter. Which conveniently brings me to our last speaker. Bindu Mohanty is actually the only panelist that I hadn't met before this conference, but in chatting via email, I quickly realized that this is an intelligent, a passionate, and an articulate woman with very strong views and the capacity to bring them to life through engaging writing. So I invited her to join us because I think she brings a crucial perspective to any discussion of the future of communalism. She passionately believes in community's potential for social and personal transformation, beautifully described by Martin Luther King when he said, "Our goal is to create a beloved community that will require qualitative change in our souls." So from Oroville, India, Bindu Mohanty.
Thank you, Graham. Are you flattering me so that I'll host the next conference? I would actually like to begin by just sharing this Indian greeting. I'm sure all of you know. Namaskar. Which could loosely be translated into, I bow to the divine mystery in each one of you, in each sentient and non-sentient beings. I also would just like to acknowledge the honor of sitting in a panel with Joanna Macy. Like as to so many of us, she has been my teacher, my mentor, and an inspiration, and deeply grateful for that. Last but not least, Kosha and I, along with Lua, we had a session this afternoon where we were talking about the North-South challenges and the divide, which Kosha spoke about. So I do feel a sense of responsibility coming from the South, as Graham was also saying, even recognizing that it's such a privilege for someone from the South to be sitting here. So, thank you all. Okay, for the topic at hand. My topic was to, let's say, these are some preliminary thoughts about the Great Turning and what I believe is the transformative effort that is required of individuals and communities which participate in the Great Turning. When Kosha was speaking, I thought this is the perfect metaphor or image for Great Turning when she gave us that beautiful picture of how she was walking following the sadhu in a flip-flop. And the mountaineers crossed her with all their probably Nike and Adidas gear or whatever it is. So it doesn't really matter that there are billions of people following the corporate world and marching, leaving their waste and going on. I am interested in the women and men like Kosha who choose to walk the less taken path, who choose to follow a sadhu in flip-flops. I mean, even I won't wear flip-flops. I'm sorry, not to make a joke of it. What I really want to share is I'm interested in the psychology of those people. What sort of transformative potential lies within those individuals? And I feel sufficient attention hasn't been given to this aspect of the Great Turning. David Cotton speaks about the Great Turning in terms of a cultural turning, a political turning, an economic turning. But a shift in cultural, economic, and political values can only happen if there is first that psychological shift within the individual to embrace something bigger than one's own needs and one's own egoic personality. One way to really understand the importance of the psychological shift that I am trying to articulate is to see what Einstein repeatedly said, that you can't solve the problems from the same level of awareness which created the problems in the first place. And it is our individual greed and corporate greed, not to always give the corporations a bad name, but it's our individual greed which has created the problems that we see, the problems of social justice and environmental justice that we face today. So we definitely need to somehow evolve to a higher consciousness, to transcend to a different level of reality to solve these problems. And we've mentioned this problem of climate change, the most pressing challenge that faces us today. And what strikes me about this particular problem is this is not a problem of a tribe or a nation. It's not a problem of the North or the South. It's a problem that faces the whole world, all the species on this earth. For the very viability of the earth is in question. And so, the question is, can we really evolve a consciousness where we can hold the needs of all this planet in order to find a solution to this problem? Joanna Macy, of course, recognizes the need for such a psychological shift, because she calls the third dimension of the great turning, she calls it as a shift in consciousness. And she calls it as a profound shift in the way we perceive things. A profound shift in a perception of reality. And I would like to suggest a way for communities to deepen their participation in this psychological shift. What I mean is, communities already act as crucibles that allow for a transformation of individual consciousness. Because when an individual chooses to join a community, you're already choosing a reality that is different from market reality. You're already choosing to move away from individual appropriation of wealth to having a more participatory sharing of wealth. And, Graham, I still have some more time? Because Joanna has given the license to talk about science-based spirituality, so I'd like to ask us to deepen our participation in the great turning, to deepen our participation in the psychological turning that I'm speaking of, by engaging with one of the biggest discoveries of our times, and that is the discovery that we live in an amazing, evolving, constantly expanding universe. I'd like to really unpack this. Just when I walked into this room, a friend of mine who's clicking a picture at me right now, Iris, she was complimenting me on this little gold jewelry that I'm wearing. This is a piece that's made in Oroville, and I naturally wear it to feel connected to home. But equally, what blows my mind is gold is a precious metal because it's born out of an exploding star. It's only at the stages when the star is a supernova that it explodes that it threw this gold into this earth, out of which it was mined and became a piece of jewelry. How cool is that? And not only that, I mean, well, okay, the jewelry is still an outer piece. Our very bodies are made out of stardust. All the elements that comprise the earth were forged in the star's belly. And I'm saying this just to again give us a visceral sense, an embodied sense of what it means not to think of ourselves as South Africans and Indians and Jain or Transition towns, academics or communal people, but to be at home with the universe. And to see what lessons we have to learn from the universe. So, what does the universe do? The universe delights in producing more and more complex forms of organization. The human brain is actually the most complex clump of matter that exists, just in terms of. And to bring it more towards, give it a deeper spiritual sense, Teilhard de Chardin, which I'm sure all of you have heard about, speaks of complexity as bringing higher degrees of value into existence, a higher degree of compassion, higher degree of sentience, of knowing, of freedom. So that's one level of complexity. In my talk earlier today, one simple way of understanding complexity is to think of it as that which holds in balance the forces of differentiation and integration. The universe delights in diversity. I mean, no two snowflakes are alike, no two leaves on a tree are alike. Our fingerprints are all different. I know because I got fingerprinted to come here on a visa. And so on the one hand, there is this amazing diversity which ultimately sort of coalesces in creating each one of us unique individuals. And on the other hand, we always live in existence. No man or woman is an island. Our existence is a question always of coexistence. And so yeah, another of my favorite writers, Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, he says that the more we can deepen our understanding of this evolving universe, the more perhaps we can help in the continual unfolding of life. And as with Csikszentmihalyi, I feel that an individual's participation in this evolutionary process is best done in a community, because the community gives an immediate frame of reference for interconnection. And there is still so much we have to learn about that balance between the individual and community. If you just look at human history, you'll see that capitalistic societies, and this was part of Iris's research, mainstream capitalistic societies tend to alienate the individual. And communist societies have sadly repressed individuality. And in many communities, we struggle with that tension about how much of an individual can I be and I still remain connected to the community. I guess I would just say that these thoughts have been informed by Sri Bindu, whose spiritual vision and whose understanding of the transformative potential of human beings basically has been Orwell's inspiration. Sri Bindu's work has been our inspiration. And so I would like to make a call that if you are already living in a community, think about these terms of differentiation or integration. How can you hold these two together? If I was to come out openly with my spirituality, I would use Karen's terms and say, how can you hold your core individuality and still build collective consciousness? And I know for many of you, living in communities is not a choice. I have talked to Bill about it. But I'm sure you'll find, because that's our very existence, I'm sure you'll find ways to deepen our sharing and have some form of communal sharing and living. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you, Bindu, and thank you all the panelists for a huge diversity of points of view, and important, each and every one of them. Thank you, thank you.